The story begins on an icy, snow-covered planet with an extremely harsh environment. A man clad in armor holds a tracker, searching for the bounty he's about to capture. Not far away, inside a tavern, a group of alien thugs is ruthlessly bullying a weak merchant. As the automatic doors slide open, the approaching figure is unmistakable. It's the bounty hunter, Djarin. He is a man of few words, known for his swift and decisive actions. His Mandalorian pride makes him habitually ignore unrelated individuals. His unexpected entrance disrupts the bandits, unsettling their dominance in the tavern. One of them even complains that the vibration from the door spilling his drink was an excuse to pick a fight. Djarin, however, remains unfazed by such provocations. At this moment, his focus is solely on the bounty he's come to claim, but the thugs begin closing in, pushing the limits of his patience. A fight that could have been avoided erupts when one of them dares to scratch his armor. In mere moments, the so-called tough guys find themselves easily taken down by Djarin. Sensing danger, a burly man bolts for the exit, but Djarin gives him no chance to escape. A sudden blaster shot seals his fate, forcing him to pay a heavy price. The fish-like merchant, who had just been bullied, offers a reward in gratitude, only to realize, to his horror, that he himself is Djarin's target.
I can bring you in warm, or I can bring you in cold.
Djarin utters his signature phrase before leading the bounty out into the frozen wasteland. As the ferryman's whistle sounds, a transport skiff is summoned from the distance. Djarin boards the skiff, heading toward his ship. Upon reaching his destination, just as the skiff begins its return journey, a massive beast suddenly erupts from beneath the ice. In an instant, the skiff, along with its pilot, is swallowed whole. The fish-like bounty panics, desperately urging Djarin to open the ship's hatch. As the ice fractures beneath them, a strong, firm hand pulls him to safety. Amid the crisis, Djarin remains remarkably calm, as if he's experienced such dangers countless times before. But just as he prepares to take off, the beast clamps its jaws onto the ship, refusing to let go. Djarin grabs a high-voltage shock rod and steps resolutely toward the hatch. Seizing the perfect moment, he delivers a powerful electric strike to the creature. Blue energy surges through the beast's body, proving too much for the cold-blooded predator. With the threat neutralized, Djarin pilots his ship away from the planet and into space. His only concern now is reaching the Bounty Hunters Guild to turn in the mission. The fish-like captive has long heard of this infamous cold-blooded hunter and knows his fate is likely sealed. Terrified, he uses the excuse of needing the restroom to slip into the ship's lower deck. His only real motive is to distance himself from Djarin, hoping to avoid direct confrontation. Seizing the moment, he begins devising an escape plan. He quietly opens the secret weapons vault but quickly shuts it, lacking the courage to fight Djarin. His fear intensifies when he discovers other bounties encased in carbonite along the walls. Realizing he's next in line, panic sets in. Carbonite freezing is an advanced technique. It doesn't kill but temporarily immobilizes its victims. As Djarin strides confidently into the guild's headquarters, every hunter in the room turns to look at him. His efficiency in completing missions far surpasses that of his peers. Jealousy lingers in their eyes, not just for his success, but for his Mandalorian armor. Djarin pays them no mind. He only cares about meeting with the guild leader to turn in his bounty and collect his reward. After completing the transaction, he immediately requests more work. His relentless drive stems from a single goal: crafting a full suit of Mandalorian armor. For now, his only custom pieces are a helmet and a single shoulder plate. So when he learns that the next mission offers double the reward, he accepts without hesitation and heads to meet his client. This time, however, the job is tougher than usual. The target's details are vague, and the client demands the bounty be taken alive. As an incentive, the client offers a piece of Mandalorian steel as a down payment. Without a second thought, Djarin takes the deal. His first stop is the Mandalorian Enclave, a secret refuge for his people. Since the Great Purge, true Mandalorians have become rare. Under the guidance of the armorer, the remaining warriors are slowly rebuilding. Djarin treats the armorer with the utmost respect. Carefully, he hands over the Mandalorian steel. With expert craftsmanship, the armorer forges a new shoulder plate for him. Meanwhile, a spaceship speeds toward the arid planet known as Arvala 7. The rugged, mountainous terrain makes it clear this world is barren and inhospitable. Finding a suitable spot, the ship makes a smooth landing. As the hatch slowly opens, out steps the bounty hunter Djarin. According to his tracker, the bounty is somewhere on this planet. He instinctively raises his rifle, scanning the surroundings. The scanner locks onto two amphibious creatures lurking nearby. Djarin barely acknowledges them and continues surveying the area. Suddenly, one of the creatures lunges, its jaws snapping open to reveal razor-sharp teeth. Before he can react, it bites down on his arm. Thrown off balance, Djarin struggles to stay on his feet. In desperation, he strikes at its eye with his fist. The beast recoils in pain, momentarily letting go. As it prepares to attack again, a tranquilizer dart suddenly takes it down. The creature collapses, unconscious. Before he can regain his footing, another one charges at him, only to be hit by a second dart. Djarin has just been saved. As he looks around, an elderly figure approaches on a reptilian mount. The man introduces himself as Kuil, a humble vapor farmer. Though he speaks little, he immediately understands why Djarin is here. Many bounty hunters have attempted this same mission, but none have returned alive. This means Djarin's task will be far more dangerous than expected. To reach the target's location, he must first learn to ride the reptilian creatures. A stretch of cracked, arid terrain lies ahead, and only these beasts can traverse it. But the creatures refuse to cooperate. Djarin's attempt to subdue them through brute force only agitates them further. After being thrown to the ground yet again, he contemplates an alternative method. Kuil, however, reminds him, "You are a Mandalorian. Your ancestors rode dragons. You can tame this little beast." When it comes to Mandalorian honor, Djarin refuses to back down. Determined, he changes his approach, seeking to connect with the creature on a deeper level. As Djarin gently reached out and stroked the creature, the amphibious beast gradually calmed down, becoming docile instead of agitated. This time, when Djarin mounted it, he had full control. Riding the creature, the two easily traversed the cracked, dry terrain and reached their destination in record time. At that moment, Kuil bid him farewell. As usual, Djarin immediately pulled out his binoculars to survey the camp. Besides the stationed guards, he also spotted a bounty droid already on the mission, storming the enemy base alone. The moment the droid fired its first shot, several guards were effortlessly eliminated by its 360-degree rotating blasters. Djarin attempted to approach for a conversation, only to be met with ruthless gunfire. With no choice, he pulled out his guild-issued bounty tracker to identify himself. Realizing someone was competing for his bounty, the droid coldly warned Djarin to leave the mission. Before either of them could claim the bounty, Djarin proposed a truce, suggesting they team up to take down the enemy and split the reward. Without hesitation, the droid agreed. The moment a bullet struck its metal casing, the battle resumed. Unconcerned about cover, the droid stood in the open, unleashing a relentless barrage of blaster fire. Djarin's tracker confirmed that their target was inside, but waves of reinforcements kept arriving. The droid once again charged forward, feeling no pain, activating its berserker mode and mowing down enemies without pause. More and more enemies arrived, making it impossible to clear them all. As the droid's ammunition began to run low, it was forced to seek cover. Another wave of enemies advanced, completely surrounding them. When the enemy rolled in a heavy cannon, the droid, unexpectedly, showed fear. It initiated its self-destruct countdown, preparing to sacrifice itself. Djarin quickly stopped it, instructing it to provide cover while he fought his way through. Despite his plea, the droid continued its countdown. Djarin insisted on taking the lead, charging toward the cannon while the droid held the line. The droid displayed commendable bravery, but couldn't withstand the cannon's firepower. Seizing the moment, Djarin used his grappling cable to latch onto the cannon, pulling himself toward it. Once in position, he unleashed a rapid onslaught, eliminating the enemy with ruthless efficiency. This was the combat prowess of a top-tier bounty hunter. Within moments, the battlefield was cleared, and his robotic partner was saved. With the outside enemies neutralized, Djarin forcefully pushed open the door. Their bounty was inside the warehouse. His scanner locked onto the target inside a small hovering cradle. Carefully, Djarin opened the cradle, only to find a tiny alien baby, vastly different from the 50-year-old description given by his client. This was the first time Djarin met Baby Yoda. Though 50 years old, the child was still an infant. Baby Yoda's wide, innocent eyes gazed up at him, stirring a distant memory. Djarin's own rescue by the Mandalorians when he was a child. Perhaps due to shared trauma, the hardened warrior felt compassion for the first time. So when the droid raised its blaster to execute the target, Djarin didn't hesitate. He shot the droid down. For the first time, he abandoned his honor and broke the guild's code. The two locked eyes, the warrior and the child. Sensing no malice, Baby Yoda reached out a tiny hand. In that moment, something deeper than words connected them. At dusk, Djarin found a secluded spot to tend to his wounds. As a bounty hunter, self-treatment was a necessary skill, and he had grown accustomed to it. Baby Yoda, noticing Djarin's injuries, toddled toward him, attempting to help. But Djarin, unaware of the child's healing abilities, simply thought he was being playful and gently placed him back in the cradle. The next day, Djarin set off toward his ship with Baby Yoda in tow, only to discover a group of Jawas dismantling it. His ship was in ruins. These greedy scavengers survived by looting others' possessions. Without hesitation, Djarin drew his rifle and opened fire. Jawas were fragile. A single shot sent them scattering. Despite their small stature, they were incredibly fast. In mere moments, they loaded his ship's components onto their massive sandcrawler and sped away. Djarin took off in pursuit, but couldn't keep up. Frustrated, he aimed at the sandcrawler's exhaust pipe and fired, but against such a massive vehicle, a few shots barely made a dent. Determined, he pushed himself to run faster, closing the distance. After a grueling chase, he managed to climb onto the lower deck, but a lookout spotted him. Alerted to his presence, the driver veered dangerously close to a rock formation, nearly sending Djarin plummeting to his death. With quick reflexes, he found an opening and narrowly avoided disaster. Undeterred, he resumed his ascent. The Jawas retaliated, hurling debris to knock him off. Djarin knew that if he didn't retrieve his ship's parts, he'd be stranded on this planet. Gritting his teeth, he pressed on, enduring the attacks. Then, a sudden jolt of electricity struck him, making the climb even more perilous. By the time the second Jawa opened a hatch, Djarin had already anticipated their tactics. When he finally reached the top and drew his blaster, a dozen Jawas were already in position, blasters aimed at him. Luckily, his armor shielded him from serious harm. As he watched the sandcrawler disappear into the distance, defeat settled in. Without his ship's components, there was no way off the planet. The weight of his predicament bore down on him, and for a moment, all he could do was look at Baby Yoda. The tiny creature couldn't speak. How could it possibly understand his sorrow? Regaining his composure, Djarin returned to the wreckage of his ship. It was in shambles, barely recognizable. Clinging to a sliver of hope, he attempted to start the engine, but the Jawas had stripped the most vital parts. He was at a dead end. With no other options, he picked up Baby Yoda and walked away from the ship. One thought crossed his mind: Kuiil. Perhaps the kind old man could help. Fortunately, Kuiil knew the region well and led Djarin to the Jawas' trading outpost. After intense negotiations, the Jawas agreed to return his ship's parts, but for a price. They wanted him to retrieve an egg from a mudhorn. Djarin had no choice but to accept. Riding aboard their sandcrawler, the Jawas took him to the beast's lair. When the doors opened, Djarin stepped out alone. A cold wind swept through the entrance of the dark, filthy cave, making him pause. Cautiously, he scanned the surroundings, steadying himself before stepping forward. Little did he know, he was walking into a fight for his life. Inside lurked a rare, 5-ton mudhorn. With a deafening roar, it charged, sending Djarin flying 100 meters through the air. If not for his Mandalorian armor, Djarin would have already met his end. As the mudhorn adjusted its stance for a second charge, Djarin quickly tried using fire to drive it away. Instead, this only fueled the beast's rage, making it even more aggressive. Against such overwhelming strength, Djarin's counterattacks were futile. After enduring multiple collisions, he was battered, bruised, and on the verge of unconsciousness. His armor, now submerged in mud, had lost several of its functions. Yet Djarin's indomitable spirit refused to yield. Summoning his last ounce of strength, he drew a small blade, prepared for one final stand. As the Mudhorn charged at full speed, Djarin braced himself for death. But just as it reached him, it suddenly froze in midair. Djarin lifted his head in shock. His towering enemy was inexplicably suspended above the ground. Unable to comprehend what was happening, he slowly got back on his feet. Still gripping his knife, he maintained a defensive stance, prepared for whatever came next. Only when he confirmed that the Mudhorn was completely immobilized by an unseen force did he take a moment to scan his surroundings. His gaze landed on Baby Yoda. It was him. The tiny creature, trembling from exertion, had just saved his life. Controlling such a massive beast had pushed Baby Yoda beyond his limits. As the Mudhorn broke free from the child's force grip, Djarin seized the opportunity, driving his blade straight into its weak spot. This was not a victory Djarin could take pride in. He owed his life to Baby Yoda, yet he had come here with the intent of handing him over for a bounty. A pang of guilt crept into his heart. When he approached Baby Yoda, the little one had already collapsed from exhaustion. For the first time, Djarin felt a sense of protectiveness growing inside him. He had risked his life against the Mudhorn for a simple egg, an offering to the Jawas in exchange for his ship's stolen parts. Yet when he handed over the so-called prize, he was shocked to discover that the greedy scavengers merely wanted it as a snack. Djarin could only shake his head in exasperation. As long as he got his ship's components back, that was all that mattered. That night, with Kuil's help, he began repairing the Razor Crest. By the time the ship was fully reassembled, it was already the next day. After bidding Kuil farewell, Djarin piloted his ship away, heading straight into space. Upon reaching his destination, an internal struggle gnawed at him. He had accepted the client's down payment, meaning he was obligated to hand over Baby Yoda, no matter how much he hated it. With heavy steps, Djarin carried the child into town. Oblivious to his fate, Baby Yoda curiously observed the bizarre alien species roaming the streets. When Djarin arrived at the guild's drop-off point and knocked on the door, Baby Yoda seemed to sense what was about to happen. As the stormtroopers emerged, his tiny body tensed with fear. Once the client confirmed that this was indeed the asset they had sought, he handed Djarin a container filled with pure Mandalorian steel. Beskar. This was enough Beskar to forge an entirely new set of armor. As Baby Yoda was taken away by the scientist, Djarin couldn't help but ask, what would become of him? His chest tightened as the question left his lips, but he knew he had no say in the matter. Silently, he took his reward and left. His first stop was the Mandalorian armorer. The container he carried held a rare 100% pure batch of Beskar, the highest bounty he had ever earned. The valuable metal drew the attention of other Mandalorians, sparking jealousy that nearly led to a confrontation. Only the armorer's authority managed to diffuse the tension. She began crafting a new, custom-fitted set of armor for him. When Djarin finally donned his newly forged armor and returned to the Bounty Hunters Guild, every pair of eyes turned to him. His Beskar suit shone too brightly. It was bound to draw trouble. And trouble came swiftly. A sudden explosion echoed through the air, and two stormtroopers rushed to investigate. They found a gaping hole blasted through the wall of the containment chamber. Someone had infiltrated the facility, but it was too late to stop them. With his new armor, Djarin's combat abilities had reached an entirely new level. The stormtroopers who tried to intercept him were cut down with ease. Slashing and blasting his way through, he fought toward Baby Yoda's holding cell. When he finally reached it, he saw the child, weak, barely conscious. Scooping him up, Djarin turned to leave, only to find himself surrounded. The stormtroopers had anticipated his move. Realizing he was outnumbered, Djarin deliberately lowered his weapons, setting Baby Yoda down to lull them into a false sense of security. Then, activating his armor's newest feature, he launched a counterattack, eliminating every last one of them. With Baby Yoda safely in his arms, he made a beeline for his ship, ready to escape. But then the unthinkable happened. Every bounty hunter's tracking fob in the guild suddenly began flashing. At that very moment, they all received the same contract. The target? Djarin. By rescuing Baby Yoda, he had broken the guild's code. As he walked steadily toward his ship, bounty hunters emerged from every corner, surrounding him. The Razor Crest was in sight. but he had no choice but to stop. With Baby Yoda still unconscious in his arms, they demanded he surrender the child. That would only happen over his dead body. A battle was inevitable. Djarin made the first move, firing the opening shot. Leaping into cover, he shielded Baby Yoda while returning fire. He carefully placed the child in a speeder, then grabbed his disruptor rifle, forcing a droid to drive them away. Using the moving vehicle as cover, he fired precise shots, picking off bounty hunters one by one. But from the shadows, the guild leader struck, sniping the droid in a single shot. With the speeder now disabled, Djarin found himself pinned once again. Silence fell as the hunters cautiously approached the lifeless speeder. From inside, Djarin's rifle barrel slowly emerged. A single shot rang out, sending one bounty hunter into oblivion. Then another. Seeing this, the remaining hunters hesitated, scrambling for cover. When a third tried to peek out, Djarin put a blaster bolt right between his eyes. The battlefield fell into a tense standoff. The guild leader, playing a more strategic game, attempted to distract Djarin with conversation. Feigning diplomacy, he raised his hands in surrender, while subtly signaling his men to advance. The fight had now turned into brutal, close-quarters combat. With his ammo nearly depleted, Djarin resorted to his final option: fire. He activated his flamethrower, driving back the encroaching hunters. With his flamethrower depleted, Djarin had reached the end of the road. He turned his gaze to Baby Yoda, silently bidding him farewell. As the enemy closed in, he no longer resisted. Just then, a powerful energy blast streaked across the sky. Explosions rocked the battlefield as a barrage of missiles struck the incoming enemies. 2 Mandalorians, clad in full armor, descended from above. His people had arrived, fully armed and ready to rescue him. With overwhelming firepower, they provided the perfect cover, allowing Djarin to break free. The bounty hunter stood no chance against the Mandalorians' sheer might. Djarin clutched Baby Yoda tightly and rushed toward his ship, escaping the chaos. Under the protection of his kin, the Razor Crest lifted off safely. Once the ship stabilized in the air, the Mandalorian captain soared alongside him, offering a salute. Djarin, however, couldn't shake the feeling that he was just showing off his jetpack. Now, with Baby Yoda in his care, Djarin was about to embark on a journey of exile. Somewhere in the galaxy, there was a planet with an environment reminiscent of Earth. A paradise untouched by war. Verdant mountains cradled crystal-clear rivers, a hidden oasis of tranquility. The local villagers had lived for generations by farming blue shrimp. Today was their grand harvest festival. Though their civilization was primitive, still rooted in agriculture, the people exuded happiness. Children laughed as they chased frogs by the ponds, playing without a care. A peaceful refuge, far from the chaos of city life. This was the dream of many. Suddenly, the roar of a ship echoed in the sky. The villagers looked up, watching in awe as it passed overhead. It was Djarin. He had chosen this planet as a potential safe haven, a place where Baby Yoda could live in peace, away from the relentless pursuit of bounty hunters. Carefully selecting a secluded landing spot, Djarin docked his ship and turned to Baby Yoda. "Stay here. Don't move," he instructed. As the ramp lowered, Baby Yoda tilted his head, blinking adorably at him. It was clear. He had no intention of obeying. Djarin sighed. He had no choice but to take the little one with him. Baby Yoda eagerly stepped forward, excited to explore this new world. His eyes sparkled as he curiously observed the restaurant patrons. Djarin walked cautiously, scanning his surroundings, noting a strong-built woman sitting at a table. She was, without a doubt, the most dangerous person in the establishment. When the server approached, Djarin wasted no time inquiring about the woman. But in the brief moment it took to place his order, she had already vanished. Concerned, he quickly stepped outside. Activating his helmet's scanner, he tracked her footprints behind the restaurant. Following the trail, he reached the back alley, only to find that the footprints abruptly disappeared. She was waiting for him. Before he could react, she struck. Her combat skills were exceptional, far superior in close-quarters combat. Her punches and kicks were precise and powerful. Had it not been for his armor, Djarin would have been knocked out cold. As they fought, their clash drew the attention of bystanders, disrupting the intensity of their duel. The woman introduced herself as Kara, a former Imperial officer, Disillusioned by the Empire's cruelty, she had retired early, seeking refuge on this planet. Before long, she would become one of Djarin's most important allies. That evening, as Djarin prepared to settle in, 2 villagers arrived by boat, seeking his help. They recognized his armor. They knew he was a Mandalorian. From ancient records, they had read of Mandalorians' legendary combat prowess. The villagers explained their plight. Every harvest season, a group of raiders, led by vicious kobold-like creatures, would descend upon their settlement, stealing their hard-earned bounty. Their peaceful lives had turned into a nightmare. They were willing to pay handsomely, but Djarin was reluctant. He had no interest in another battle. Yet when he heard that the village was in a remote, isolated location, he reconsidered. After some thought, he agreed. Knowing the enemy outnumbered them, he invited Kara to join him. When they arrived at the village, a group of excited children ran up to greet them. They were especially fascinated by Baby Yoda. The little one, in turn, seemed to enjoy the attention, quickly bonding with the children. The next day, in preparation for the inevitable attack, Djarin and Kara scouted the raiders' previous movements. Following the tracks deep into the forest, they soon realized the situation was worse than expected. The massive footprints weren't from just raiders, they belonged to an Imperial ATST walker. There was no way the 2 of them could take it down alone. Returning to the village, they held an emergency meeting, strategizing a defensive plan. They instructed the villagers to set up barricades along the perimeter and taught them basic self-defense techniques.
Fire!
Days later, the harvest season arrived. The raiders came early, setting up camp near the village. Djarin and Kara decided to lure them into a trap. They infiltrated the enemy camp, planting timed explosives before drawing the raiders toward them. The first wave of raiders fell easily, but the second wave was armed and far more numerous. The fight dragged on, neither side gaining the upper hand. As the timer on the explosives ticked down, Djarin fired a few precise shots into the wooden barricades, creating small escape gaps. Just as the explosion detonated, he leaped to safety. The blast forced the ATST to emerge from its hiding place. Djarin and Kara sprinted toward the village, leading the towering war machine straight into their trap. Back at the village, the barricades were ready. The villagers stood prepared, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Then, from the shadows of the forest, 2 glowing red eyes emerged. The ATST's thunderous step sent tremors through the ground as it neared the pond. The moment it was about to step into the trap, it hesitated. Tension filled the air. As its searchlights illuminated the battlefield, the kobold warlord led his forces into a full charge. Kara gave the command. The first wave of raiders fell instantly, but the ATST retaliated, launching explosive rounds that sent the villagers scattering. In the chaos, Kara grabbed Djarin's rifle and charged forward. Under Djarin's cover fire, she leaped into the pond, positioning herself beneath the ATST. Taking careful aim, she fired at its sensor eye, but the rushed shot missed its mark, alerting the war machine to her presence. It retaliated with relentless fire, forcing her to retreat. Meanwhile, the raiders seized the opportunity, storming the village in close combat. The villagers, untrained in battle, struggled to hold their ground. Realizing they were outmatched, Djarin ordered some of them to retreat. Kara steadied herself, took careful aim, and fired a precise shot straight into the ATST's sensor eye. The war machine, now uncontrollable, staggered and toppled into the pond, falling into the trap. Djarin seized the moment, sprinting toward the machine and tossing a timed explosive into its exposed eye. A deafening explosion erupted, completely destroying the Imperial walker. Seeing their war machine obliterated, the kobold raiders panicked and fled. For the first time in years, the villagers, once oppressed, smiled in relief. With the battle over, peace and tranquility returned to the village. Meanwhile, the mischievous Baby Yoda decided to impress his new friends by swallowing a frog whole. The children erupted into laughter, causing the tiny creature to reconsider his performance. But just as the village basked in its victory, an intruder arrived. Another bounty hunter, tracking his target. He drew his weapon, locking onto Baby Yoda. A single gunshot rang through the village, sending everyone into alarm. Fortunately, Kara had already spotted the threat. Djarin checked his tracker. He knew this planet was no longer safe. His plan to leave Baby Yoda here had been shattered. With no choice but to keep moving, he packed his belongings and prepared for yet another escape. Though reluctant to leave, he accepted his fate in silence. After bidding farewell to the villagers, Djarin piloted his ship into space, searching for a remote planet to hide. But he barely had time to think before another ambush struck. A laser blast suddenly streaked through the void, slamming into his ship. He had been found. Djarin's ship took heavy damage, forcing him into a defensive position. With the situation growing dire, he had no choice but to seek repairs on the nearest planet. That planet happened to be Tatooine, under the control of Boba Fett. At that moment, Boba was riding a massive bantha across the desert, hunting a gang of speeder thugs to avenge his people. Djarin landed at a repair dock, where an elderly mechanic assessed the damage. She shook her head. The repairs would require a fortune. Unfortunately, Djarin had been losing money on recent jobs. Strapped for credits, he headed to the cantina, hoping to find a bounty to fund the repairs. But the droid managing the guild's board told him there were no available contracts. Just then, a rookie bounty hunter sitting nearby spoke up. He had a job and needed a partner. When he activated the holographic target, the image of Fennec Shand appeared. Djarin didn't hesitate. He refused immediately and turned to leave. But the hunter made an irresistible offer. All the reward money would go to Djarin. That changed everything. The next day, the two rode speeder bikes across the desert in search of Fennec. Upon reaching a desolate canyon, they spotted a figure being dragged by a creature. Djarin moved in to investigate, only to realize too late that it was a trap. A sniper shot struck him square in the chest. The sheer force of the impact knocked him off his feet. Her rifle was powerful. This was the first time Djarin and Fennec Shand crossed paths. Unbeknownst to them, their battle would also draw Boba Fett's attention. Fennec's rifle had been heavily modified. Had she not been firing from long range, even Djarin's Beskar armor might not have withstood the blast. There was no way to approach her in broad daylight. Djarin decided to wait until nightfall. As the sun set, they raced toward Fennec's position on their speeder bikes, using flash charges to disrupt her aim. The intense bursts of light blinded her sights, rendering her precision useless. The tactic worked perfectly. They launched a second flash charge, closing in fast. But Fennec was quick. She recalibrated her sights and fired another shot, hitting Djarin once again. His bike flipped, sending him tumbling into the sand. Wounded but still aware, he fired one more flash charge, covering his partner's advance. Yet, within close range, Fennec's shot hit Djarin hard, knocking him down with such force that he struggled to rise. As she prepared to deliver a fatal shot, his partner snuck up behind her, gun drawn, but he was inexperienced. In a blur of motion, Fennec flicked a concealed dart from her rifle, disarming him instantly. Even Boba Fett himself would struggle in hand-to-hand combat against her. Within seconds, she had taken him down, locking his throat under her boot. Just as she was about to finish him, Djarin aimed his blaster from behind, turning the tables. Unarmed, Fennec had no choice but to surrender. However, there was another problem. 2 bikes weren't enough to transport 3 people. Djarin ordered his partner to find a mount, but the rookie hesitated. He didn't trust Djarin and feared he would take off with Fennec. So Djarin left to find a mount himself, leaving the rookie to guard Fennec alone. A mistake. Fennec seized the opportunity and began negotiating with him. She revealed a secret. His supposed partner, Djarin, was a high-value bounty himself. If they worked together to take him down, he could claim a far greater prize than her bounty. His name would be legendary in the guild. The rookie thought it over, and greed won. Instead of freeing her, he decided to eliminate her entirely and keep the reward for himself. With Fennec out of the way, he rushed back to the repair dock, intending to seize Baby Yoda. When Djarin returned, he found Fennec collapsed, immediately realizing what had happened. Wasting no time, he mounted his new beast and sped toward the repair station. Back at the repair dock, Djarin arrived to find the rookie bounty hunter holding Baby Yoda and the elderly mechanic hostage. Out of options, Djarin was forced to drop his weapon and raise his hands. The rookie ordered the mechanic to place Djarin in shackles, but But Djarin had one last trick. Concealed in his grasp was another flash charge. In an instant, he detonated it, blinding his captor. Seizing the moment, he moved swiftly. One shot, one kill. With the crisis averted, Djarin reclaimed Baby Yoda. Elsewhere in town, a powerful woman was making a name for herself in the fighting pits. Not even the strongest gladiators could best her. Her name was Kara, a former Imperial warlord. Disgusted by the Empire's ruthless tyranny, she chose to flee and start anew on this distant planet. As she stood victorious in the fighting pit, Djarin arrived at the perfect moment, seeking her help. Just before this, as Djarin was leaving Tatooine, he received a message from the guild leader. His home planet had fallen under the control of Imperial remnants, the very faction that had placed the bounty on Baby Yoda. This time, the call wasn't about another mission. It was a plea to unite against their common enemy. Djarin knew running forever wasn't a solution. The only way to guarantee Baby Yoda's safety was to take the fight to them. And so, he came here to seek Kara's help. Hearing that their mission was to take down Imperial remnants, Kara agreed without hesitation. Djarin led her to the ship's armory, allowing her to choose a weapon. Suddenly, alarms blared. The ship rocked violently. Djarin rushed to the cockpit, only to find it was a false alarm. Baby Yoda had been playing with the controls again. This incident made Djarin realize that the child needed someone to watch over him. The first person he thought of was Kuiil. It had been 2 years since they last met. As they arrived at Kuiil's homestead, a droid carrying a tray of tea greeted them, startling both Djarin and Kara. Djarin was stunned. He had destroyed this droid during their previous mission. Kuiil explained that IG-11 was no longer an assassin. After Djarin had disabled him, Kuiil had salvaged the droid and reprogrammed him into a service unit. The assassination protocol that once targeted Baby Yoda was gone, replaced with a directive to serve and protect. But Djarin still didn't trust him. Now, their team had grown to 4, including the droid. After meeting with the guild leader, they devised a plan. Kuiil would return to the ship and guard Baby Yoda. Djarin, disguised as a prisoner, would be escorted by Kara and the guild leader. The next day, they arrived at the occupied town. Meanwhile, Kuiil rushed toward the ship with Baby Yoda. The once thriving streets were now under Imperial control. Strict security checks were required to enter the town, but as soon as the guards heard they were transporting a prisoner, they let them through without question. Carrying an empty hover cradle, they successfully reached the client's office, but the client was impatient. He wanted to see Baby Yoda immediately. With no other option, the guild leader stalled for time. As tensions escalated, a stormtrooper interrupted with an urgent call for the client. Seizing the opportunity, the guild leader discreetly unshackled Djarin's cuffs. Djarin gripped his blaster, preparing for battle. Suddenly, a barrage of laser fire erupted outside. Several stormtroopers were gunned down before they could react. By the time the shooting ceased, the office was in ruins. No one knew what was happening outside. Djarin and Kara peered through the window. Imperial death troopers were gathering in formation. A troop transport vehicle rolled in, unloading 4 squads of reinforcements. The enemy had intercepted their transmission.
Are you back to the ship yet?
Not yet.
Get back to the ship and bail. Get the kid out of here. We're pinned down.
2 scout troopers sped off on bikes, heading straight for Baby Yoda. A sleek Imperial dropship descended, its doors slowly opening. Out stepped the mastermind behind it all, the Imperial warlord. His presence was overwhelming. Without hesitation, he issued an ultimatum. Hand over the child, or this place will be reduced to rubble. But Djarin had one concern above all: Baby Yoda. He frantically called for Kuiil over the communicator. No response. This was a hopeless battle. Surrounded by an overwhelming force, Djarin and his team couldn't afford to make a move. Meanwhile, Baby Yoda had already been captured. Kuiil, who had been escorting him, had gone silent. As the Imperials neared their checkpoint, preparing to deliver Baby Yoda to their commander, a sudden shift changed everything. IG-11 made his move. Kuiil, before his death, had given the droid a final order: to protect Baby Yoda at all costs. The Imperials underestimated him. They didn't know IG-11 had once been a top-tier bounty hunter, a ruthless killing machine. Without hesitation, he dispatched 2 stormtroopers and seized control of a speeder bike. With Baby Yoda in tow, he raced toward town to rescue Djarin. Back at the standoff, the Imperial forces had deployed a heavy repeating blaster. With a single command, they could wipe out everyone inside. Djarin was still desperately calling for Queel.
Nothing.
They might have jammed the link.
Wheel has been terminated.
What did you do?
I am fulfilling my base function.
Which is?
To nurse and protect.
Then, on the horizon, a figure approached at high speed. IG-11 arrived like a storm. Before the guards could react, he cut them down in rapid succession. Accelerating into the main street, he weaved through the chaos. The high-speed chase sent Baby Yoda into a fit of joyous laughter. The enemy barely had time to comprehend what was happening. As the speeder roared closer, the troopers surrounding the building turned their attention toward IG-11. For the first time, hope flickered. The distraction gave Djarin and Cara their chance. Cara unleashed a barrage of blaster fire, cutting down enemies in every direction. Under cover fire, Djarin and the guild leader pushed forward to meet IG-11. Caught between their 3-pronged assault, the enemy was thrown into disarray. But their numbers were overwhelming. The Imperials quickly adapted, shifting their focus onto IG-11. Realizing the tide was turning, Djarin seized an enemy heavy blaster and unleashed its full power. With renewed momentum, Cara doubled her firepower. But another unit of stormtroopers had slipped past them, planting explosives on the entrance. Then, boom! The blast shattered the iron door. Cara was now in a dire situation. Without her covering fire, Djarin was left exposed. As he turned his blaster cannon to respond, the warlord fired a precise shot, hitting the cannon's power source. The explosion sent Djarin flying, knocking him unconscious. IG-11 and the guild leader quickly provided cover, allowing Cara to drag Djarin back into the building. The warlord had lost his patience. He ordered the flame troopers forward. Flames quickly spread, engulfing the building. Djarin's injuries were worse than they had imagined. Cara attempted to remove his helmet to tend to his wounds, but Djarin refused. He was ready to sacrifice himself rather than endanger the others. He instructed IG-11 to open the sewer grate. There was an underground path leading to the hidden Mandalorian refuge. Handing over his Mandalorian sigil to Cara, he entrusted her with Baby Yoda's safety, urging her to seek out his people. But before IG-11 could open the grate, the enemy had already breached the building with fire. With no way out, Cara braced herself for the worst. Just as the flames roared toward them, Baby Yoda stepped forward, raising his tiny hand. A powerful force barrier emerged. The fire stopped mid-air. Djarin and Cara stared in disbelief. Baby Yoda's raw force power was beyond anything they had imagined. With a flick of his little fingers, the flames reversed, engulfing the attackers and blasting them out of the building. Exhausted, Baby Yoda collapsed. The building was now a burning wreck. IG-11 finally cut through the sewer grate. Djarin insisted on staying behind to cover their escape, ignoring their protests. IG-11 ordered Cara and the guild leader to go first, staying behind to tend to Djarin's wounds. The same droid that had once been programmed to assassinate Baby Yoda was now risking everything to protect him. And yet, Djarin still didn't fully trust him. IG-11 decided to prove his loyalty by removing Djarin's helmet to treat his wounds. With the treatment complete, IG-11 helped Djarin into the tunnels, where they reunited with the others. Djarin remained weak. The medication had stabilized him, but his strength hadn't fully returned. Guided by Djarin's memory, they followed the tunnel, hoping to reach the hidden Mandalorian enclave. But when they arrived, a grim sight awaited them. Scattered across the ground were Mandalorian helmets and armor. Djarin didn't need an explanation. His people had been slaughtered. Nothing was more painful than losing family. Overcome with grief, Djarin fell to his knees, unable to hold back his sorrow. The sight of the discarded armor triggered a memory, the day the Mandalorians had rescued him as a child. The Purge had already decimated his people once. Now their last refuge had become a graveyard. A stern voice cut through his despair. The armorer reprimanded him. "Mandalorians do not weep." She ordered him to collect himself and continue searching for any surviving members of their clan. Taking the fallen warrior's armor, she began forging Djarin's final piece. She placed all the hopes of their people onto his shoulders, etching his sigil onto his armor, a mark of his personal honor. Then, the enemy arrived. Imperial troops flooded into the tunnels. The armorer ordered Djarin and the others to flee. She would buy them time. Before they left, she handed Djarin a jetpack. With this, he could now fight in the air. Djarin's heart was heavy. He didn't want to leave her behind, but if the Mandalorian people were ever to reunite, he had to press on. As the armorer made her stand against the Imperials, they hurried toward the lava river. Only by crossing it could they reach the exit. But their ferry droid had been damaged. The heavy iron boat wouldn't move by brute force. With no other choice, Kara opened fire with a Gatling blaster, forcing the boat loose. Miraculously, the droid reactivated. It guided them down the river toward the exit. As they neared the opening, Djarin instinctively activated his scanner. Sure enough, Imperial forces were waiting in ambush. Worse, the river's current was pulling them directly into the trap. In a desperate moment, IG-11 stepped forward. He was willing to sacrifice himself to clear a path. The droid that Djarin had once distrusted was now ready to die for him. Djarin refused, ordering him not to do something foolish. But IG-11 ignored their pleas. He handed Djarin the jetpack and Baby Yoda, making him promise to protect the child. Then he stepped into the molten lava. Djarin could only watch as IG-11's hunched figure disappeared into the flames. In Baby Yoda's wide eyes, a glimmer of sadness emerged. For the past few days, IG-11 had cared for him. Now, he was gone. The explosion obliterated the enemy blockade. Djarin sighed as he watched the wreckage. This was the price IG-11 had paid to give them an escape. Before he could process his grief, a warship streaked across the sky. The Imperial warlord had been waiting for them. Blaster fire was useless against the ship's armor. The guild leader urged Baby Yoda to use the Force, but the child only waved, thinking the enemy was greeting him. Djarin suddenly remembered the jetpack the armorer had given him. He strapped it on, readying himself for battle. As the warship closed in, he ignited the thrusters, launching himself into the air. Missiles flew toward him. Djarin dodged and fired his grappling hook, latching onto the ship. But he had never used a jetpack before. The ship's wild movements flung him around, leaving him struggling for control. Gradually, he adjusted, stabilizing himself. Reaching the cockpit, he aimed his blaster and fired. Nothing. The warlord's ship was heavily reinforced. It violently jerked, trying to shake him off. Thinking fast, Djarin planted 2 timed explosives on the hull and let go. He plummeted as the explosion erupted above. Landing safely, he turned to see the warship engulfed in flames. The Empire had finally fallen. The guild leader and Kara decided to stay and rebuild. They invited Djarin to stay, but he had a greater mission ahead. After bidding them farewell, Djarin set off with Baby Yoda. His journey to find the remaining Mandalorians had just begun. As scavengers swarmed the wreckage, something stirred. A blade cut through the remains of the ship's hull. The warlord was still alive, and with that, the first season came to an end.